Hello. This morning I paid a visit to a few places, not many to be honest, but a few. And what I found was a lot of CDs, but a lot of shit CDs, a lot of CDs that I don't want. There was not a lack of stock, but there was a lack of much good. But the last shop I went to, I did find some things. Nothing super amazing, but nonetheless. And they were also discounted. So I'll talk about that at the end anyway. Let's go through them one by one. So just recently, I was listening to a interview with Daryl Hall from Hall & Oates, which was interesting, but also reminded me that Daryl Hall is really quite a prick. He comes across as monumentally arrogant. And I get that to an extent because he's very successful and maybe that success and talent breeds a certain arrogance, but there are a lot of as successful or more successful people who don't show that same kind of prickishness as he does. It's really quite if you read online, I thought it was just me, and then I searched online, and there's a lot of comments the same thing. He really comes across as just a dick, talking about things that don't require to be a dick. But anyway, he was talking about David Foster, and David Foster is a name that pops up a lot in that kind of 70s, 80s, into the 90s era. He was a producer and I think also a writer. If you listen to the Beyond Yacht Rock and the Yacht or Not podcast with those guys who, speaking of Daryl Hall, but I'll get that in a second, those guys who created the yacht rock term, they kind of coined that term, and they've got a few podcasts over the years, and they talk about David Foster a lot. And so it's a name that's been in my mind, and so I saw 2 CDs of David Foster, 50 cents each, and I thought, well, I'll pick them up and have a listen, and if I don't like them, this one here, I don't imagine I'll keep it, but this one here, I'm interested to listen. You know what I was saying about yacht rock and Daryl Hall, in that very interview I was listening to, the interviewer brought up yacht rock, not saying Hall & Oates is yacht rock, but kind of he was I think he was talking about the Doobie Brothers and that kind of era. And then Daryl Hall kind of stopped him and went off on the term yacht rock and said that yacht rock was invented by 2 jerk-offs in California, which I guess is maybe J.D. Riznar and David Lyons or the other guy, Hunter, the guys who were on the podcast with him. But it was quite funny. He really got quite heated about yacht rock. Anyway, so if you're not familiar, here are some of the songs, a collection of his greatest songs that he either produced or co-wrote on. So we got I Will, I Swear, I know that one by All For One. That was in the 90s, the mid-90s. Unbreak My Heart by Toni Braxton, that was huge. The Madonna song You'll See. At the top of my head, I can't think of that song. But you see, these are just produced. That one's co-written. Goodbye with Air Supply. Because You Loved Me, produced, the Celine Dion song. You're the Inspiration, co-written with Chicago. The Glory of Love, co-written with Peter Cetera. He produced the Natalie Cole and Nat King Cole duet of Unforgettable. That was huge in the 90s as well. Produced Runaway. So a lot of these kind of omnipresent radio songs of the 90s, he was part of. He co-wrote After Love Is Gone with Earth, Wind and Fire. That's interesting. It's always, when you hear co-wrote, it's always difficult to know, because you see some studio footage, or you hear stories from the studio, and sometimes producers really give a lot of input into not necessarily like writing the melody or the riff, but a kind of the arrangement. Like Bob Rock, if you look at some of the footage, like there's a lot of footage on YouTube now of the recording of, is it on YouTube? Where did I see it? Of Load and Reload. And some of the songs, he really, not was telling them, but was part of the arranging and rearranging of songs, of taking bits and changing them around. But I don't think he has any writing credits at all. Maybe his producer's contract, he got points, and so therefore that kind of took care of the writing. But I don't know, it's interesting to know. And then there was something else I can't remember. Something else I read and listen to so much about guys talking about recording, and there are definitely ones where the producer got a co-writing credit, but they didn't do that much, really. And then sometimes they were it was 50-50, they were part of it. But regardless, you can see he's got a lot of kind of big credits here. Huge artists. Madonna, Celine Dion, Chicago, The Cause. Now this one, the second one, this is actually his own music. The River of Love. Now, looking at those songs and looking at this photo, you could maybe kind of guess what this is going to sound like. This was released in 1990. And he didn't self-produce it. I actually did. Produced by Humberto Gatica, and Grown Up Christmas List is produced by David Foster. He didn't self-produce most of it, though. Put out on Atlantic in 1990. I can kind of imagine how this is going to sound. But at the same time, I'm kind of interested because, I guess there are many producers who are also artists in their own right, or became successful as producers and kind of parlayed that success into a record contract. I guess Butch Vig is the one that comes to mind from my era, where kind of Garbage got a lot of their initial notoriety and fame because Butch Vig was the drummer. And Butch Vig, his name was synonymous with that early 90 grunge alternative music boom. Like I remember, that was the big talking thing. Oh, this is Butch Vig's band, and Butch Vig produced Nevermind, so it's going to be great. Any other producers? Like I know some producers were artists, like we were saying Bob Rock. Bob Rock was in a band before he was a producer. And I'm sure there are lots of other ones that I can't think of right now. Anyway, so those two for 50 cents. Actually not 50 cents, but yes, technically 50 cents. I'll talk about the discount at the end. This is not music, but it is CD. At Home by Bill Bryson. This is an audiobook, a 6-hour audiobook with 6 CDs. Approximately 6 CDs. Now, Bill Bryson, I really like Bill Bryson's writing. Very simple, easy to read stuff. The kind of book you can kind of pick up and read in a day or two. At least some of his shorter ones, maybe something like the more recent ones are maybe a bit longer. But like, those early travel ones where there was it Notes from an Island about England, and then the Neither Here Nor There, which is Europe. Can't remember the American one. There's the Australian one, Down Under something. Just really easy to read, and I guess page turners is what you could. Then he kind of got into more non-fiction topical writing, not so much travel writing. So the first big one was The Short History of Nearly Everything, which is kind of like a pretty massive undertaking. He's trying to cover the whole of the history of everything in a single book. And I've read that a couple of times. And then he did one about the human body. He also did one about the year of 1927. He did one about his growing up, the years he grew up in the 1950s in Iowa. Anyway, this one is about the history of the home and the different rooms in the home and how they've evolved over time, and how, the concept of a living room and the et cetera, et cetera. So I don't own any audiobooks. And I was at two minds whether to get this, but I thought, well, $2, something different. And I thought it was going to be abridged, but it's 6 hours, so probably it's not abridged. Anyway, that's that. And then the last thing, Iron Maiden, the first Iron Maiden CD I've ever owned in my life. It's kind of funny. I'm a pretty big fan of metal. And of all the, if you think of the big names in heavy metal history, if we start with Black Sabbath, and I think Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, Metallica, Slayer, Megadeth, I guess you could throw Anthrax in there, although I think they're kind of several levels below in my opinion. Pantera, of kind of the 70s, 80s, into the 90s, I guess those ones I just named would be the biggest ones. I might be missing a couple there. I've owned albums, CDs, and listened to extensively all of those bands except for Iron Maiden. Iron Maiden have always kind of passed me by, or I've passed them by. It never really, I could never really get it. I never, people talk about the Number of the Beast as one of the greatest albums of the 1980s and one of the greatest metal albums, and what's the other one? I don't even know the names of that. Was it The Seventh Son of the Seventh Son or something like that? Is that the name of the song? And I listened to them, or gave them a little listen, and it just really did nothing for me. I've heard the singles like Run to the Hills and Can I Play with Madness, and I've heard other bits and pieces like The Trooper and Alexander the Great. And when I first saw this, like this, it says Iron Maiden, Edward the Great, I thought this was just an album, like a concept album. They've done lots of historical type shit, like The Trooper, which is about the British at the during the Crimean War, I think, and Alexander the Great, which is about Alexander the Great. I'm sure there are other songs they've done about historical things. I think Bruce Dickinson has got a degree in history from memory. So I thought this was like a concept album about one of the King Edwards in England or something. And then I turned it over and it says the greatest hits. And then it clicked. I was like, oh, Eddie, their mascot. And I was like, oh, of course. And so what have we got on here? Run to the Hills, Number of the Beast, Flight of Icarus, The Trooper, Minutes to Midnight, Wasted Years. I've heard Wasted Years. Can I Play with Madness, The Evil That Men Do, The Clairvoyant. So a lot of those, Bring Your Daughter to the Slaughter, I've heard that. A lot of those, the names are familiar. The Wicker Man, where I've heard them suggested, I've seen them written on lists. Sometimes on Spotify, I'll go and, just if you're in the mood for kind of very generic metal, you'll choose one of those metal playlists, and it'll have things like Enter Sandman or Walk by Pantera, and then something of Iron Maiden will come on, and it'll invariably be like one of those kinds of songs. And I almost always skip it. And not because it's terrible or anything. It's just, I don't know, just something where I've never wanted to give them a try. But I saw this, and like I said, I've never seen an Iron Maiden album in a secondhand shop before either. This is the first time I've ever come across one. And it was $1. And I thought, well, for $1, that is a bargain. And this can be a good introduction to Iron Maiden for me, because it's the greatest hits, which is always a good way to kind of introduce yourself, I think. There's the band. So I know that that's Bruce Dickinson and that's Steve Harris. the bassist and kind of leader, I think the main songwriter of the band. And that's Nico McBrain, who recently retired. And then the three guitarists are Adrian Smith, Yannick Gers, and who's the other guitarist? What's his name? Adrian Smith. I'm sure I'd know if I saw his name. Let's have a look if I can find it. They toured here relatively recently as well. Dave Murray. So Nico McBrain, Yannick Gers, Steve Harris, Bruce Dickinson, Adrian Smith, and Dave Murray. And the manager, Rod Smallwood. They toured here recently. And again, it's kind of like never kind of even for 2 seconds did I think, I want to go to that concert. But, there's no denying they're huge. And they are cited by so many people, especially from the kind of European metal, like a lot of the kind of extreme metal from like places like Scandinavia and Germany. A lot of those guys cite Iron Maiden as an influence. I was reading something. What's his like a nutcase? What's his name? Varg Vikernes from Burzum. He was talking about how little that guy's just a contrarian dickhead, but he was saying how little music he actually liked, and the few things that he did like he basically is like, I don't like any metal. I never liked metal, even though he fucking was in a heavy metal band, but black metal band. But he said he liked The Cure. He loved The Cure, especially what's their biggest one? Disintegration. And what's that other like kind of electronic ambient type thing? Dance of the Dead? Is it Dance of the Dead? I think I'm getting that mixed with something else. Tchaikovsky or Stravinsky, he also said, and Iron Maiden. So the one kind of metal band that he admitted to liking was Iron Maiden. So as I say, so that was $1, that was $2, and these were 50 cents. So that's $4. But today at that particular op shop, I also got this map, but I'll talk about it in a second. This was $2. They had a special event. And so when you went up, they had a top hat on the counter with pink balls with a percentage written, like 25% or 10% or 50%. And the lady held the hat up, and I picked out a ball, and I got a 50% discount. So for all of this, I only paid $3. Everything was half price. So that was 50 cents, that was $1, and these were 25 cents each. And then the map. So I've talked about before, if you've watched any of my other videos, that I also collect old maps. Well, not even necessarily old. I don't really care about the vintage, and I don't like they had like about 50 maps there today. I don't like just pick up any. It's kind of maps that interest me for some particular reason. Sometimes it's the historical vintage, like a particular era I find interesting, or a particular place, a place where I've traveled to, a place from kind of history. This one is a map, a 1/4-inch map of Solway, Firth, which is in Scotland. Do you know why I purchased this? The immediate thing that popped out to me is that there's that Slipknot song, Solway, Firth. Actually a pretty great song. One of their better modern era songs. I think it was from their album they released in 2019, which I can't remember the name of. There's that song called Solway, Firth. And so when I saw that, I was like, here's a map of the place that inspired Corey Taylor to write the song Solway Firth. Solway Firth is kind of like it's that there, a body of water, kind of like an inlet maybe, I don't know, it kind of it goes into like an estuary up near the kind of border between England and Scotland, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, because there's Carlisle. And I think that, yes, that line there, sorry, I can't, the dotted kind of X line, that's considered to be the border, the frontier between Scotland and England. And so Solway Firth is also kind of like the, kind of like a point of division between the two places as well. So yeah, I'll look at that later. Sometimes I'll just look at maps for like half an hour. I've talked about this before in another video. It's kind of like a I don't know what you call it. I'm interested. I've always been interested in geography and history and travel. And so a map kind of coalesces that stuff together. It's also a little bit like sometimes I think I'm probably on the spectrum to a degree for many reasons. And many people have said that to me over the years. Not strongly, but like I said, to a certain degree. And one of the things that kind of, they get fixated, not fixated on, but I like to look at and kind of consider and pore over is old maps. So yes. Anyway, a good day, I think, for many reasons. We'll leave it there. Thanks for watching.